It is so good to be with you this morning. I just love this time of year, and I get to preach this morning on one of my favourite topics, which is joy. And we're just closing out our series, just a little mini-series, Come See Jesus, and we've looked at hope and peace, and now we're looking at joy this morning. And I want to kick off with a little experiment, church. So you're going to join with me, okay? First of all, I want you to close your eyes. So all close your eyes. And in your mind's eye, I'd really just love you to try to picture Jesus in front of you and look at his face, particularly, and note his expression. Okay, now open your eyes. Now hands up, who saw Jesus smiling? Hey, the spiritual formation pastor, that's me, is clearly doing a good job. Yes, this is good news. This is good news. Because I wonder what, for some of us, we have an image of Jesus, don't we, in our mind's eye that might not look like that. You know, in all of the art down through the ages, Jesus often looks quite sad. He looks quite somber. Doesn't he? He often has this sort of grim expression on his face. And I understand why. Isaiah 53, he was a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering, those things. That is true. But those were in moments of Jesus' life. If we look at the gospel, we actually see a man who is so full of life and abounding in joy. This morning, I want to look at this particular point. I want to look at a different image. If you might have had the somber image in your mind, I want to shatter that a little bit this morning. Not simply because I happen to be speaking on joy, but because of the biblical precedent of it. Jesus was happy, filled with joy. It's who he is. Hebrews tells us that if we look at Jesus, we can see and know exactly what God is like. Put another way, Jesus Christ is perfect theology. When we want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. And if we have a theology of God, we need to have a theology of joy. A famous pastor who's much wiser than I am said it this way: his nature is the nature of joy. His nature is the nature of delight. The Old Testament in Zephaniah 3:17, it says that he rejoices over us with singing. Can you imagine that of God? Sometimes we have the image of the angry guy with a beard in a cloud, right, pointing at the earth. But he's the one who rejoices over us with singing. You can actually translate the word used in Zephaniah as actually like spinning. Like he's spinning with delight. Like he's actually sort of dancing, rejoicing. Is that an image that we have of God? So, I want to major on my very first point, and then I've got two other points that will follow after that, which will be a bit shorter. But I want to focus on the very nature of Jesus being filled with joy. He's a happy person, full of life. Johnny said in the very first in the series on hope, he said, are you a gainer or are you a drainer? Did I get that right? Gainer or drainer? Jesus was the ultimate gainer. He was the guy that was at the party that was full of abounding life. He was the ultimate gainer. Richard Buckner, again, another guy that's way more intelligent than me, wrote a book called The Joy of Jesus, Humour in the Gospels. And he looks at all the nuances of the way that Jesus speaks, which, to be fair, is lost on us in our context now. But in the first century, Jesus was humorous. He was funny. Like, he cracked quite a lot of jokes. Can you believe that? They weren't inappropriate, but they were funny. He knew the times and he used that to his advantage. He was filled with joy. let's look at the scriptures. Let's look at his life. So, as I said, if we want to see what God is like, let's look at Jesus. Let's look at right from the beginning. Great to look at this as part of the Christmas story, given the time that we're in. So Luke 1, this is the first time that we sort of hear of the joy that is around Jesus. It's when Mary is visiting her cousin Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist, and she's a bit further along than Mary at that point. Mary is also pregnant with Jesus. And here's this kind of interaction, Luke 1, 41 to 45. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leapt in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. In a loud voice, she exclaimed, "Blessed," or actually that word can be translated happy. Happy are you among women, and happy is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of the Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leapt for joy. Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord will fulfill his promises to her. You see, even the embryonic Jesus in his mother's womb was so filled with joy that John, the baby in his mother's womb, leapt for joy. Joy is contagious, and it's found in the person Jesus. What an incredible story. And then we read on to where Jesus is born. So I turn the page to the right, Luke chapter 2, 8 to 12. And this is just a beautiful picture, first of all, because it's the shepherds in the field. It's not the high and mighty that Jesus is kind of revealed to first. It's the ordinary, everyday bloke who's hardworking, grafter. Like that's who Jesus decides the angels are going to reveal to first. So here it is. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all people. Today, in the town of David, a Saviour has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord." How incredible, this in-breaking moment of history, the most magnificent, universe-changing moment. Jesus is born, and here it is. The angels are saying this is going to bring great joy to all people. And it's about Jesus. Let's keep going through this topic. So I'm going at quite a fast pace, but this is kind of my major point here. Jesus is joy embodied. So again, turn to the right if you're coming with me in the Bible, Luke chapter 4. And this is just a story and a picture, just one amongst many, of Jesus. Can you imagine walking around with Jesus as one of his disciples? Have you ever been in a church meeting where someone gets healed? And there's literally like outcries of joy and whoops and like, I won't do it because it'll just be embarrassing. But that's what happens. I've been in meetings where literally people have got out of wheelchairs and the whole room has just become electric with joy. Like, that's who they were following around. They were seeing this day in, day out. Jesus coming and setting people free, healing people physically. Like thousands of people were following him, and the joy that was there must have been electric. That's who he is. Here's just one example. At sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. It's so downplayed, isn't it, in Scripture? There's just obviously so much that they could have said that they didn't, but here it is. Moreover, demons came out of many people shouting, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew he was the Messiah. Incredible. As you are watching on as a disciple, you can just imagine it in your mind's eye. This was happening. Some would be like aghast with like, what has just happened? What has he just done? Some would just be overjoyed, particularly the ones that were healed. This is who he is. And then I want to finish with this scripture on my first point, and it's from Luke 15. And this is one of the parables, and we've looked at these before in the previous series. But it just is a picture of the nature and character of God in joy. It's the story of the lost sheep. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? This is the God that we know, the one who pursues the lost sheep, the one who is lost. He's going after you. I felt like that lost sheep once upon a time. Maybe there's someone in the room that feels like that this morning. You're missing from the flock, and he's coming after you in pursuit of you because he loves you. And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. You see, for Jesus, I'm going to come on to this in a second, but for Jesus, the joy and salvation were so together for him. There was absolute joy in finding restoration and redemption for the person who was lost. That might be you this morning. If you're here and you're searching for Jesus, he's pursuing you in his love. He wants you back to where you belong. There's a party when one person turns in repentance and comes to fullness of life in following Jesus. So, as you can see, my whistle-stop tour there. Jesus is joy. He's joy embodied. And here's a simple kind of point that comes from that. When we are filled with God's presence, a natural overflow is joy. If he embodies joy, when we ask him to come and fill us with his Spirit, we are filled with his joy. John 15:11, where Jesus is speaking to his first disciples about the Holy Spirit, the one who is promised to come. He said this, John 15, "I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." He was speaking of the Spirit. When he comes, the joy of Jesus will be complete because he is dwelling in his disciples. If you're a follower of him, you can be filled with the Holy Spirit. You can be filled with joy. And friends, this kind of joy is not dependent on our circumstances. You know, our circumstances can come at us and affect the way that we feel and the way that we are. But the joy that Jesus promises is something that comes from inside. It's not affected from the outside. It comes from within, from the power of the Holy Spirit. And there's always joy in him. I was reading in my preparation of a story of a prisoner who was put in prison under false charges in Soviet Russia, this was. And he was put into a gulag in Siberia. So deathly cold, horrible place. And he was put into solitary confinement because they found that this believer in Jesus, essentially was a follower of Jesus, was starting to kind of spread the word about Jesus. And the prison officers got hold of him and said, "No, you're not doing that anymore. You're going into solitary confinement." So he was in complete darkness, in solitary confinement, in the smallest cell that they could possibly find. Cramped, isolated, and dark. And here's what he said. In the darkness of the cell, alone and cold, I felt as if my heart would burst with joy. That just summarized it for me. His circumstances were awful. The worst that they could be. Pretty much. I can't imagine what that was like. And yet in that darkness and in that cell, he was filled with the Holy Spirit. So much so that the joy that he had, felt like he was going to burst. That's the joy that Jesus is talking about. We read in Galatians 5:22 that a natural fruit of the Spirit is joy. So the first one's love, then joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those things are all characteristics of God. When we're filled with him, when we keep allowing him to fill our lives, those things are put on display for the world to see. What an incredible story from that prisoner in the gulag. Hey, just inspired me. So, that's my second point. When we're filled with God's presence, a natural overflow is joy. And then my third point, and I'll finish with this one, is that salvation is what fills God with the most joy. We saw it, didn't we, in that story of the lost sheep that I read. He throws a party. He's that happy. Rejoice with me, he says. Rejoice with me. There's rejoicing in heaven as someone gives their heart to Jesus, is found again. And Luke 15 is scattered with these wonderful parables telling us of what God's like. The lost coin is yet another one. The woman who lost the coin and throws her house upside down to try and find it. And when she finds it, she says the same thing. Rejoice with me. And it says there's rejoicing in heaven. And then the lost son, or the prodigal son, it's sometimes called, is the parable that comes after it. And once again, the father in this story, and in a Jewish context, this would have been really hard to swallow. The father literally pulls up his tunic and runs to the son who is coming back. Having done all sorts of awful things, this son, he's turned against his father. He's lived his own way. And he comes back, tail between his legs, thinking that he's going to be just a slave to the father. And the father runs towards him. Just an incredible picture of joy in salvation. Hebrews 12 verse 2 says this of Jesus, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. I want to unpack that a minute, just as I close with this. Jesus endured the most humiliating death. Under false charges, he was not guilty. He had people mocking him the entire time that he was imprisoned. In his walk towards the cross, on the cross itself, he had people saying, "Come down if you're the Son of God." He faced that mockery and he faced the enormity of that pain and suffering. Why? For the joy that was set before him. My personal interpretation of that is that you are his joy. That's what he was seeing through the eyes of eternity. I need to go through this, that the joy set before me is the redemption of all people who would choose to follow me. That's you. If you're sat in the room this morning and you're not sure if you're following Jesus, he gave everything for you. Just know that. That is the enormity of his love. And it is his joy to welcome you into his kingdom. He loves you. I want to end with just a very brief personal testimony. I remember when I first came to know Jesus. I won't go into the entirety of the story, but if you want to know it, I'm happy to share. But essentially, I'd sat in this vicar's office. I'd never met him before. Jesus essentially told me to go and see this guy called Mark Bailey. I didn't know who he was. He was a vicar. And he sat and he shared his faith with me. He said, at the age of 20, which was the age that I was at the time, I came to know Jesus. And he shared his story. And he gave me, as a good vicar did, he sort of said, you can maybe find out more about Jesus on the Alpha course, or you could maybe, ask me more questions, come and see me every week, or you could come to faith in him now. And I was like, yeah, that one. So I prayed a very simple prayer. And on the way home to my mum and dad's house, I remember feeling all at once this surge of absolute joy. Like I couldn't contain it. I know maybe a tiny bit of what that prisoner was going through. Just incredible joy. And what I think was probably going on at that time is maybe God had just given me maybe a tiny bit of a glimpse of the joy in heaven over the fact that I'd said yes to him. Maybe just that little bit I knew.